Well, good morning, everybody. As we start off this Friday, I want to look back over the last 3 days at total accumulated precipitation. It's really as we've been talking about this kind of ring of fire setup here. A couple of things to just take note of. We're still looking at what was left of Harold. Harold right now, the remnants of which are still moving through the Four Corner states, and later on today are going to really increase the risk of a lot of very heavy rainfall in parts of Colorado. We're going to have to watch that quite carefully. We've seen that this particular slot here over in the eastern Great Lakes, getting into the eastern Corn Belt, has had multiple rounds of very strong storms, including more storm reports from severe weather damage last night. But if you look at the total rainfall amounts here, some places in like Ohio coming out of Michigan over Lake Erie, including parts of Ontario and Pennsylvania, even New York. So we have several places in through here that have picked up well in excess of 3 inches, and a large region in through here that has had, approaching half a foot of rainfall. Other parts that I want to keep a close eye on here just in the near term, storms moving through parts of the Pacific Northwest. And remember, this is one of our driest regions here, especially right along the coast as of late. And we're going to see this ridge just continue to kind of get squashed and moved out of the way here in the near term of this forecast. So about some satellite data. So the sun was rising early this morning. Well, I'm going to take you back to yesterday to show you a couple of important things. So you can see way far down here in the bottom right, this would be Franklin. But we watched yesterday afternoon as some storms just really began to pop on this flow. So a couple in Wisconsin, some larger ones showing up over here in parts of Michigan. Remember yesterday we talked about the isolated storm events that we could see in the temperature forecast. Really showed up well there. Kind of the outflow dominated cool off behind these things. I'm going to show you that again in a few seconds. But you'll see a lot of isolated storms in parts of the Mid-South, getting down here to lower Mississippi River Valley. Again, one of our driest areas in the country over the last two months. A couple of isolated storm chances in through here. This is what's left of Harold, and just want to show you as the sun began to set, we could get another good look at what that wildfire smoke looked like in parts of the Pacific Northwest over toward Montana. Now, in the overnight hours, you saw it right at the very end. This is where we had our next region of pretty active severe weather. And we can see in the infrared how that just blew up last night over this same region we've been talking about. And that's what delivered quite a bit of very heavy rainfall. But you also notice here over the Pacific Northwest, there is a shortwave that's moving on shore, and it's got through this morning a few areas bringing in some rain. So that's quite important just to see that. Now, as the front continues to sag, our attention today is going to go to the chance of more storms sitting in this area, and we're going to watch what the leftovers of the overnight severe weather here does. So before I go any further, I do want to show you this. I'm going to take you to Missouri because we talked yesterday about the models popping off these storms. So here they are, okay? Right here, there's a little frontal boundary. Outflow, it could be, I actually don't even know what caused it, but air was forced to converge in this area. And as it did so, it produced these storms. Now watch this. The storms go up, and they're abandoned pretty quickly. So you see the anvil continues to propagate forward, south in this case, due to the wind shear around that upper level ridge. But the surface winds, do you see it here? See this kind of arcing shape to the cloud field? That's the outflow of this storm. If you remember yesterday, we showed how there were these big kind of blobs of cooler air that showed up in the high-res NAM model, and these were the storms that did that. So quite impressive that the NAM grabbed that. Overall, it's been tough using some of those high-resolution models to pick up on this, so I think it's quite fascinating. By the way, later you can see some of the jet contrail here. That's what these little streaks are, so condensation trail out of our aircraft. Now, I do want to show you very quickly, this is what the severe storm reports look like from yesterday. 164 of them. We had some here in the Northern Plains, but again, we were watching this corridor last night, but some down here in parts of North and South Carolina too. All right, I want to get you up to speed on the latest radar animation. So this is showing us, again, the ring of fire as it's setting up early this morning. So there are our storms here. And now we're keeping an eye on a couple of areas today for some very heavy rainfall. There will be a few isolated storm events that happen along this sagging cold frontal boundary here that could produce some heavy rains, locally heavy rains. We are going to watch Colorado into this part of Wyoming, Nebraska. I'll show you in a moment very, very carefully today for very heavy rain. And you can also see the effect of the shortwave that's moving through the Pacific Northwest, helping to kick off a little better upward motion and some storms in that area. Now, how strong is the front? Let's see if I get an update on this. It's not, quite to the extent of what you're going to get in terms of a cool down this weekend in this area. But you do note that we've already had in some places here over a 10-degree change, cool off in the temperatures just in the last 24 hours. So that front by later on today is going to kind of stretch and arc right in through here. So on one side, we've got flow coming in like this. and it's kind of splitting a bit here. This is a, kind of a hint of a deformation setup, but not, I guess I wouldn't call it a true deformation setup like you can get in winter. But that is going to be the focal area for our stronger thunderstorms today. It's also going to be where the northern edge of the excessive heat begins to erode. The circulation you see here, this is partly left over from Harold, which came over like this and is sitting here and could actually spin up later today as a little mesoscale convective vortex in this area, which is why I'm concerned about the heavy rain here. We have Franklin, and we've also got here off the coast a coastal low that, again, is going to increase our chances for rain in the northwest. But as we look at it, this is what we've got for our all hazards weather map early this morning. And you can see we've got excessive heat warnings out, but they've now been pushed farther to the south. There's a flood watch out, excessive heat watch down here over parts of Southern California and Arizona. And we have some red flag warning plus some air quality issues in the Pacific Northwest. So today's SPC outlook is just kind of a narrow area in through here where that frontal boundary sags, where they've got a marginal risk for severe storms. Finally, a break from it here in parts of Michigan, Ohio, Ontario, Lake Erie, this particular region. And I want to zoom in and just show you some of our high-res models, picking this up at 6 a.m. None of them were well initialized this morning, meaning they didn't do a good job capturing what was still going on this morning. But we'll have a look at the high-resolution rapid refresh. A lot of heavy rain in parts of New England. You can see isolated storms associated with the front that we've been talking about coming through the Midwest here. But as we play on to later today, this is 1, 2, 3, 4 o'clock this afternoon. This is what we'll keep an eye on. Right in through this area, the potential for some very heavy rain. Then we're going to see isolated storm complexes running through this area. Now the model doesn't have it. It just won't. But we're going to keep an eye out for that later on this afternoon and this evening right in through this area as the frontal boundary sags farther to the south. As we then play into the overnight hours, I think a lot of my attention will probably be on the locally heavy rainfall in this area. And again, this is just going to continue to push Colorado ahead with its already being the wettest year on record in several of the climate reporting districts here. So how do we get into early Saturday morning? The front continues to sag by 8 a.m. Saturday morning. It's now draped across parts of Kansas, Missouri, the southern half of Illinois, and over to Kentucky, which means colder air is coming in behind that. And we'll once again just watch for storms, most likely in this corridor through the afternoon on Saturday. Now from here, let's just get a good picture, a good glimpse at maybe what the next 7 days holds. Starting in the west, we do have better chances for more moisture in parts of Washington. This will get into British Columbia as well. But we have a large section of the country that, despite having some cooler weather coming in, the air's dry. That's why we're seeing this forecast of cooler conditions, but not much moisture into this area. This is what we're talking about already happening in the next 24 to 48 hours. That's the heavier rain there. But a lot of attention is going to go this weekend over what happens here into our southeast. And that is because we're watching a stalled out frontal boundary in this area first, followed by the potential for a tropical system to come up here out of, originally out of the Caribbean Gyre and then make its way, we think, into the Gulf of Mexico. So we need to get in and have a quick discussion about that. How about some model evidence first? Let's just go play the European model to get an idea about this. So just rolling this through the weekend. This is now getting into early next week. So this is kind of our weekend thunderstorm setup is what you see here. All right, so we've discussed these main areas. Now we then play into early next week. Now you're going to watch rainfall increase right along this area. This is early on Monday through Tuesday. That's where that stalled out frontal boundary is. And then we're going to watch what comes out between the Yucatan and Cuba and possibly get into Florida, Georgia, and the Carolinas. See it right in through there? That's going to be I think the main story as we get into early next week. So we need to be watching this all weekend long to see how the models transition. And by the way, just to make sure you're all aware, just go to ag-wx.com and I put all of my content out here on this website. And at the very bottom, so if you just come down here, maybe you can use the navigation on the left, but click on South American Maps because it'll take you to the very bottom of the website. And I have down here a whole list of hurricane websites that you can be using to have a look at things. So just something to add to it there. But I want to compare that previous animation to normal. So this is the next 10 days compared to normal. And there's a few things we need to be discussing about this. Yes, the hurricane is one. But most of the Mississippi, Missouri, and Ohio basins right now are forecast to be dry. The wettest conditions are here in Colorado now, and then the short waves that keep sneaking through the Pacific Northwest. And I just bring that up because in a moment I'm going to talk about the Mississippi River water levels and what we need to think about going forward there. So let's go out to early next week and just get where that boundary is stalled out. So this is Franklin. The frontal boundary on Monday night stalled out here, and we're going to keep an eye on what's coming through this part of the Yucatan. So as we just watch where this potential system's going, you see that right now the operational runs by next Wednesday, Tuesday, Wednesday, are attempting to pull this through Florida. Now we know, we've talked about this all summer, how warm the ocean temperatures are in here. So we have, of course, these questions as to whether or not other ingredients will allow this potential tropical system to tap into that warmth and what that might mean in terms of its rapid development. But I always get very nervous about anything getting into the Gulf of Mexico, and even more nervous when I see stuff that starts to make a turn toward the west coast of Florida. So I just want you to know this is going to be high on my priority list to be just monitoring this weekend. Now, that's not to ignore other places. I mean, we can see what's going on next week in the Pacific Northwest, the wetter conditions here, what's left of Franklin trying to get pretty close to, the Canadian Maritimes. But if we just take this map and start to look at some probabilities, this is the chance of getting an inch in the next 10 days. So should this system form and get here into this area, we are talking about locally very heavy rainfall amounts that could spread through Florida, Georgia, and if it stays onshore, maybe into parts of the Carolinas, adding to that stalled out frontal boundary in this region. And I just bring that up. Let me just pull this up real quick, because if you just look back over the last 30 days, let's try that again. Here we go. We start to just see that there are places in through here that have been very dry and could use some rain, not a hurricane, but some rain. This also just illustrates a couple of other points here. You saw in the forecast how dry it's expected to continue to be in our one area that has just been in truly epic drought down here in Texas. And we'll get into a drought monitor in about 3 or 4 hours from now. Later on in the morning, you should check out as well. And come back to the Mississippi in a few moments, but just want to point out this whole region and how dry things are here in this part of the Pacific Northwest. Okay, next, I would like to skip from there to showing you, this. So this is this morning's early update, National Hurricane Center, Franklin staying out, but this will be the next system we'll be watching. They've now upped it to a 70% chance. They'll do a new update at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. Be sure to tune into that. Go to the National Hurricane Center's website, nhc.noaa.gov, to check that out, because we're going to want to see how this system evolves. The probabilities are now getting much higher. This is the chance of getting at least a tropical depression. We're in the 70 to 90% range now in the forecast. So this is just, we need to be watching this very, very carefully. And the ensembles, okay, they've got what's going on here with Franklin staying out. But this is where the convection currently is. It's expected to hang out here a bit over the Yucatan and then get pulled later in this direction. And we can now see there's pretty robust model tracks in that area suggesting that should something form, it's likely going to take that particular track. So again, that's next. We'll start really carefully watching it on Monday, getting into Tuesday and then Wednesday of next week. All right. So let's go from here and just broaden this back out. Look at that week 2 forecast. So let's come here, slide this down. There you are. And you'll notice that the week 2 forecast remains quite dry in this area. And this has been a pretty constant theme that we've watched all week, because even though there's some cooler weather that's going to try to come into this region, it's not packed full of moisture. So we get a drier cold front that slides through. And you'll see in the pattern in a few minutes why we're quite supportive of more storms and wetter weather across the west in this pattern. But seeing all of this, I'm just going to say, the Mississippi right now at Memphis, it tried to make, these periodic recoveries with each rainfall event through July and August, but we're currently right now 0.22 feet below low level. And if we stay in this range, then this is going to pose a kind of a threat later on this year to the risk of barge traffic not being able to make it up and down the Mississippi. It's kind of back here where we were, a year ago watching this same thing, but we really bottomed out in October. So I'm going to give you my latest update on this at the very end of this report. Okay, pattern though, take a look. This is what happens to the ridge. By the time we get into Saturday, the ridge is retrograded. Here's that high over low we've been talking about. The cooler, drier air dives into this area. Here is the low we're going to keep an eye on early next week, and that's Franklin, okay? So as we play it forward, this is Sunday, getting into Monday, we can see highly amplified ridge, trough still off the west coast. This is what's keeping the west coast, especially the northwest, with chances of storms. This is the drier but cooler air into early next week. But then you'll notice as we get out here toward the 30th, the 31st, and then into early September, that the pattern kind of reverts. It goes back to this odd-looking high over low, but this one's now got more of a, well, you saw the previous one was more oriented in this direction. This one's oriented like that. So that is going to help, this high over low. It's going to help open up a broader ridge into this area, which is partly why the week 2 forecast is drier, and it's also partly why it's going back over warmer as well. So we just play out there and just see how it all shakes down. This is kind of a consistent theme in the midsection of the country. It looks as though the start of September is going to be much warmer than average and likely drier than average for a big section of the country here, while the west sees troughing. Okay, so temperatures, just a quick thing to point out here. I got a couple emails about this. Really appreciate you guys doing that. I showed you that observation yesterday of the 95-degree dew point and the 95-degree temperature. And we suggested that there was instrument error. There was a problem, even though we know that we can get a lot of moisture if you're in the middle of a cornfield that's evaporating it. But a couple of you contacted, Daryl got an email from me this morning, or yesterday, excuse me, contacting the National Weather Service and found there was some instrument error, which was what we expected. But, still early this morning, the temperatures here never got out of the 70s. A couple of places stayed up above 80. And we're going to watch the front work on this, but it was been several days of just excessive heat here. So how does it all play out? Well, here's today's highs, but already by Saturday, cold front advances. We return to normal, even cooler than normal here, while much of the south into the southeast just remains under very oppressive heat. This is all rain-cooled air that you see back in Colorado, Kansas, and Nebraska. As they play into Sunday, you can see the cold front continuing to advance farther to the south. Getting into Monday, gets right down here, almost to the Red River Valley, into the northern halves of parts of Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia. But it's just amazing to think about how long we've been in heat down here across parts of the south. So going out to next Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday, we have another shot at some cooler air, but we do expect warmth to build back in. A lot of low to mid 90s getting their way back into the Midwest as we start the month of September. Now, just thinking about how hot it's been in Texas, I just want to show you something here. I pulled up the data for Dallas. Over the next 7 days, they're expected to have an average temperature of 90. That's including days, highs and lows. That's 5 degrees warmer than normal, and you can see the temperatures here. But what I was curious about was the year-to-date temperature graphics. If I click on that, it just shows you how, as we got through spring, versus now just plowing into summer. Look how many days where the average temperature was significantly above normal here. The black line is normal. The daily averages were up here. So they've had 38 days above 100, 79 above 90, and they've had number of days with a low above 70. There have been 75 of those, and I got them all labeled here on the graphic. So just another great way by which you can use the tools on agweather.com. All right, to show you where the heat is going, here we go. Next 5 days, there's the cool down around the Great Lakes. We then see the rebound by day 5 through 10, starting in the midsection of the country and pressing east. So we're going to go back over warm to start off this month of September. And I'm talking mainly about the midsection of the United States. When the pattern is doing this, though, okay, that's why you got cooler conditions in the west and better chances for rain in the west. All right, a couple of things on the longer term. Current ocean temperatures, El Nino continues. Southern Oscillation Index is bouncing around a little bit, still well below -7, but bouncing around. A lot of very warm water in the North Pacific. The negative phase of the Pacific Meridional mode squashed. And what we're going to be just watching here is the interaction with these ocean temperatures and what the jet stream is going to be up to. There's another part to this, though, I want to talk about. When you look at today, all the way through September the 9th, we notice that we have great upper level rising motion today. So if you just match this up over this part of the Atlantic, okay? But we notice that because of the movement of the MJO, there's going to be a bit of a suppression time period here. Sinking motion, that's what a corridor of sinking motion looks like, moving over the Atlantic and the Caribbean and into this part of South America. So this is all about an MJO transition moving back into the Indian Ocean. All right, what does all this mean? What it means is we need to see if this starts to slow down, give us a bit of a lull in the hurricane activity in the Atlantic. We need to talk about what it means for South America. But then we just need to go out there and say, well, what are the models looking at for this month of September? It's our busiest hurricane month, which means we cannot trust this forecast in this area. It's just not valid because of any tropical system that could sneak in there. Better storms throughout the Canadian Prairie. We've seen the models go drier here. And later on today, please go out and look up the latest CPC forecast. It'll show up midday today, cpc.nsep.noaa.gov. Great resource to add to this. They're going to update it midday today. I've got big questions about the Midwest, though, with this pattern, but it's about precipitation. I do agree that most of the month is going to look warm like this. And here's some of my supporting evidence for that, okay? What I want to do is, in fact, we'll come back to that one. I want to show you the average temperatures when we had developing El Niños in September. And when you have a look at it here, once this loads, it's generally warmer for most of the country. We're a little cooler west, maybe a little cooler here when you stack all these years up together, but we tend to start off the month very warm. Now, we've talked about this. October makes a pretty big shift. October tends to come in cooler for almost the entirety of the United States when there's a developing El Nino. But why I don't buy in the precipitation forecast is because the analogs suggest that even though Septembers often start off dry when there's an El Nino like this, they tend to pick back up with wetter weather. Parts of the Mid-South, the Ohio Valley, parts of the Mississippi and Missouri valleys here. Historically, we see better moisture arriving, but after middle of the month. So we'll watch that just very carefully. Last thing I want to bring up today to get us finished off, this is the latest update from the European model for the next 10 days. Now remember, there's good support for these rains now, but we do expect them to back off once the MJO realigns itself and puts more subsidence or sinking motion over this kind of just burgeoning monsoonal situation here. But there is going to be rain getting into Brazil. We've talked about it all week here. But I think it's just it's going to come in fits and spurts. So this isn't just hey, the monsoon's here. It's just going to go, and they're going to have a massive crop because of it. I think we're going to have to wait to see the full establishment of the monsoon. Now, we need better rains in Argentina because you can see when you look at the root zone soil moisture how dry it is in Argentina. But this will quickly get erased as the monsoon begins. This is the target area to watch to see if we can recover. Most long-range models suggest it does. So I'll be watching the tropics over the weekend. Be careful in Colorado for the flooding. Watch for storms draped along that front. Pacific Northwest, same thing. We got some storms coming into your area as well. So plenty to be talking about. I'll pick up again next week. Thanks.